Imagine arriving at the cabin your grandfather built with his bare hands, only to be told by an HOA president that you were a trespasser and that she owned the whole mountain. You ever think you're heading into a quiet weekend, only to realize you've walked straight into someone else's storm? That's exactly where this story begins. Devin Randle gripped the steering wheel of his dusty Ford F-150 as the road wound upward through the Blue Ridge Mountains. He had been staring at these peaks since childhood, but this trip was different. At 44, he wasn't just visiting the cabin his father had built with his own two hands. He was reclaiming a piece of family history. The cabin had stood for more than 60 years, a weathered but proud structure tucked between maples and oaks, just far enough from the nearest paved road to feel like its own world. The drive itself had been long, the kind where silence becomes your companion. Devin had rolled the windows down halfway, letting in the crisp air that always seemed cleaner at higher elevations. The road narrowed into gravel, and he remembered how his father used to tell him, "Son, when you hear the stones under your tires, you know you're almost home." That memory hit him harder than he expected. His dad had been gone for nearly a decade, but this land still carried his voice. Devin had promised himself that he'd keep the cabin alive, even if work in Charlotte often kept him from visiting as much as he wanted. This weekend was his chance. He pulled into the clearing and cut the engine. For a moment, the silence was total, interrupted only by the ticking of cooling metal and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. The cabin stood in front of him, its rough-hewn logs darkened with age, the tin roof showing spots of rust but still solid. To Devin, it looked perfect. He stepped out, stretching his back, then moved to the truck bed. He had packed light: a cooler with food, a sleeping bag, a stack of old photo albums he had taken from his mother's attic, and a box of tools in case the cabin needed a little patchwork. He slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and carried the cooler toward the front steps. The door creaked open on the first try, as if the place had been waiting. Dust motes swirled in the light as he set his things down. Inside smelled of pine, ash, and faintly of tobacco, the ghosts of his father's pipe. Devin ran a hand across the mantel, where carvings from his childhood still stood, his initials scratched alongside his father's, proof of their summers here together. He stepped back outside and decided to get a fire going before dark. The stone fire pit his dad had built with river rocks was still there, ringed with grass. Devin crouched down, stacking kindling carefully, striking a match and watching the flames catch. The crackle and warmth settled something in his chest. This was why he came. Not just to escape the city, but to remind himself that some roots run deeper than concrete and traffic. As the fire grew, he pulled out one of the photo albums. Flipping through, he saw black and white snapshots of his grandparents standing in the same clearing, his father as a boy perched on the porch rail, even himself as a kid with skinned knees and a fishing pole. It was more than land. It was legacy. Devin sat back in the camp chair, staring at the flames, letting the quiet of the mountain seep into him. For the first time in months, he felt at peace. The weight of deadlines, designs, and city chaos slipped off his shoulders. Here, he wasn't a gear designer or a man juggling work stress. He was simply his father's son, keeping watch over what had been entrusted to him. But peace doesn't always last. Sometimes when you think you're alone, that's when someone else decides you shouldn't be. Devin had barely settled into the rhythm of the mountain when the sound of crunching gravel broke through the stillness. At first, he thought it might be a neighbor passing by, though the cabin sat at the end of a long dirt lane, and visitors were rare. He squinted through the trees, catching the gleam of a silver SUV winding its way into the clearing. The vehicle rolled to a stop just beyond his fire pit. Out stepped a woman dressed in a pressed blouse and slacks, her hair swept into a bun that looked better suited for a corporate meeting than the woods. She clutched a leather-bound notebook against her chest like it was a badge of authority. Her sharp eyes scanned Devin, the cabin, and even the cooler at his feet before she spoke. "You can't be here." The words were clipped, as though she'd rehearsed them. Devin stood slowly, brushing ash from his hands. "Afternoon," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "This is my family's cabin. I'm just here for the weekend." The woman didn't return the greeting. Instead, she stepped closer, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt. Your family's cabin. That's funny, because I oversee this ridge, and I've never seen you before. Devin tilted his head, studying her. And you are? Margot Finley, president of the Ridgeway Estates Homeowners Association. She lifted her chin as if the title carried more weight than it did. This entire area falls under our oversight. We have rules about occupancy, property standards, even who is allowed to stay here. Devin let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, just incredulous. Ma'am, with respect, this land's been in my family since the 1950s, long before Ridgeway Estates was even an idea. My father built this cabin by hand. Margot's lips tightened. I don't care what stories you've been told. I know every property owner within 3 miles, and you're not one of them. You need to pack up and leave before I have to take further action. Devin straightened, his patience thinning. I don't think you understand. I've got the deed. I've got tax records. I've got photographs of 3 generations of my family right here on this land. He gestured toward the cabin. You don't have authority here. For a moment, the only sound was the fire popping between them. Margot shifted, adjusting her grip on the notebook. Her eyes flicked toward his truck, then back to him, like she was cataloging evidence of his presence. Rules are rules, she said stiffly. This community doesn't allow unapproved structures. That, she jabbed a finger toward the cabin, is not compliant. Devin's voice hardened. This cabin isn't part of your community. You can't enforce HOA rules on land that's never been in your development. I don't know how to make that any clearer. Margot stepped closer, lowering her voice, though the sharpness remained. Listen, I don't know who you are or why you're really here, but people like you don't own property up here. You need to leave before I make a call you'll regret. The words landed heavy, not just for what she said, but for what she implied. Devin felt heat in his chest, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't about to let her bait him. You can make whatever call you want, he said evenly. I'm not going anywhere. This is my land, my family's land, and I'm staying. Margot's expression curdled into something halfway between disbelief and fury. For a long beat, she just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether he was bold, foolish, or both. Then she snapped her notebook shut. Fine, she hissed. If you won't leave willingly, I'll handle it myself. She spun on her heel and stalked back to her SUV. The slam of the driver's side door echoed across the clearing. Devin watched as she pulled out her phone, her mouth moving rapidly as she backed the vehicle into a better position at the edge of the drive. He didn't need to hear every word to know who she was calling. He sank back into his chair, staring at the flames, forcing his breathing to stay steady. This wasn't how he pictured his weekend, arguing with a stranger about land his family had cherished for generations. But sometimes, when you hold your ground, that's exactly when someone decides to push harder. Margot didn't leave after her phone call. She stayed, idling in her SUV with the window rolled halfway down, glaring at Devin as if her presence alone was enough to pressure him into packing up. Every so often she scribbled something in her notebook, glancing between the page and his cabin like she was documenting a crime scene. Devin had tried ignoring her at first, focusing on the fire and flipping through his father's old photo albums. But the tension was like static in the air, impossible to tune out. Finally, he stood and walked toward her vehicle, careful to keep his voice calm. You've got something you want to ask me? He said, stopping a safe distance from her bumper. Margot lowered her sunglasses, eyes narrow. Yes, I want to know who gave you permission to be here. Because from where I sit, you're squatting. Devin almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Squatting? Lady, I told you, this cabin has been in my family for more than 60 years. Nobody gave me permission. I don't need it. I own it. She shook her head slowly, her earrings swinging with the motion. No, you don't. People like you don't own cabins in the Ridgeway Mountains. You're trespassing, and I have half a mind to tell the sheriff you're a danger to the community. Her voice had risen, carrying out into the trees. Devin's patience began to fray. Danger to the community? I haven't so much as raised my voice. I've been sitting here, minding my business, making a fire. The only threat out here is you showing up and trying to throw your weight around. Margot's jaw clenched, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. Don't play clever with me. I've lived here long enough to know when something looks out of place. And you? Her eyes swept him up and down. You look out of place. Devin felt his chest tighten. He wasn't naive. He knew what she meant. He stepped closer, planting his boots firmly in the gravel. Say what you really mean, Margot. You've already shown your hand. Her gaze faltered for just a split second before she snapped back. This entire ridge belongs to our community. I'm protecting what we've built here. You wouldn't understand. You don't belong. The words cut sharper than she realized. Devin had heard versions of that phrase his whole life. You don't belong. Yet here he stood, feet planted on the soil where his father had taught him how to fish, how to swing a hammer, how to stack logs until the walls of a cabin stood solid. If he didn't belong here, who did? Let me tell you something, he said, voice firm now. When your HOA was still a set of blueprints on some developer's desk, my family was already living on this ridge. My grandfather cut timber here. My father poured sweat into this land. Every nail in that cabin is proof, and I'm not about to let you erase that because you think your title makes you Queen of the Mountain. Margot's face flushed red. You can talk circles all you want, but I don't need to argue with you. The sheriff is on his way. And when he gets here, you're going to wish you had just packed up and left quietly. Good, Devin replied. Maybe he can explain the law to you, since you don't seem to understand it. For a long moment, the two stared at each other. The sound of birds overhead filled the silence, an almost surreal backdrop to the confrontation. Margot broke the standoff first, rolling her window up halfway and returning to her phone. Devin walked back to his chair, forcing himself to sit down. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from frustration. He thought of his father again, how the old man had always said patience was strength. Don't fight fire with fire, he used to say. Devin tried to hear that advice now, though his gut twisted. Inside the cabin, he grabbed the deed and property tax receipts he'd brought along. If deputies were coming, he wanted everything in order. He laid the documents neatly on the porch table, right beside the photo album showing his father and grandfather. Evidence. Proof. Margot kept watching from her SUV, her engine still running, exhaust curling faintly into the cool air. Every so often she'd snap a picture of the cabin or his truck, as though building a case. Devin shook his head. It was surreal. Sitting on your own land preparing to prove you belonged there. But surreal or not, it was happening. Sometimes the loudest accusations come right before the biggest confrontation. The fire had burned down to glowing embers by the time Margot raised her voice again. Devin had almost convinced himself she'd retreat, but then he heard her tone sharpen, words carried clearly through her rolled-down window. Yes, officer, I need someone out here right away, she said into her phone, each syllable loud and deliberate. There's a man trespassing on private property. He's refusing to leave, and I don't feel safe. Devin clenched his jaw. The twist of her words was deliberate, framing him as a threat when he hadn't moved an inch outside his own boundaries. He stood, shaking his head, and called out toward her. You're really going to lie like that? You're calling the sheriff to report me on my own land? Margot ignored him, her eyes locked on some distant point as she continued. Yes, I'll stay here until deputies arrive. I want him removed immediately. Then, lowering her voice, but not enough to hide the venom, she muttered, People like him always cause problems. Devin's stomach turned. He wanted to storm over, snatch the phone from her hand and end the madness. But he stopped himself. Confrontation wouldn't help. Instead, he gathered the documents from the porch table and tucked them into a neat folder, placing it under his arm. If deputies were coming, he'd be ready. Still, the minutes that followed were heavy. Margot remained in her SUV, her headlights casting a pale glow across the clearing even though dusk hadn't fully fallen. She kept glancing between Devin and the road, as if daring him to make a wrong move before her backup arrived. Devin tried to occupy himself by tightening the ropes on the stack of firewood and sipping water from his thermos. But the silence pressed down harder with each passing minute. He thought of his father's voice again, steady, patient, reminding him that truth has its own weight. That didn't make the waiting any easier. About 15 minutes later, the distant rumble of tires on gravel reached his ears. 2 Sheriff's Department SUVs appeared through the trees, their light bars flashing muted blue and red against the trunks. Margot immediately jumped out of her vehicle, waving her arms like she was flagging down a rescue team. "Over here!" she cried. "This is the man I told you about!" Devin stayed where he was, folder in hand, heart pounding but body steady. The deputies stepped out. 2 men in tan uniforms, one older with a lined face, the other younger and watchful. Both rested their hands near their belts, but didn't draw their weapons. "Ma'am, calm down," the older deputy said, holding up a palm toward Margot. "We'll sort this out." Then his gaze shifted to Devin. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on?" Before Devin could answer, Margot interjected, her words tumbling out fast. "He broke into that cabin. That structure isn't even approved. It violates Ridgeway's building codes. He's trespassing and intimidating me. I want him removed now." The younger deputy's eyes flicked to Devin, taking in his calm stance, the folder tucked under his arm, and the fire pit glowing quietly behind him. "Sir?" he repeated. Devin spoke evenly. "Deputy, my name is Devin Randle. This cabin belongs to my family. It was built in the 1950s by my father. I've got the deed, property tax receipts, and photographs right here." He extended the folder without hesitation. The older deputy stepped forward, taking the documents. He flipped through them carefully, the rustle of paper loud in the tense clearing. His brow furrowed, and he passed one page to the younger deputy, who studied it under the flashing light. Margot's face reddened. "Don't believe that. Anybody can forge papers. He doesn't belong here. I told you I own this ridge." Devin couldn't help himself. "You own your HOA's development, Margot, not my cabin, not my land." The younger deputy raised an eyebrow at her. "Ma'am, this deed looks legitimate. It's dated, notarized, and the parcel number matches county records." Margot scoffed, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. I run this mountain. He's a liar. He's dangerous." Devin let out a breath, shaking his head. "I came here for peace, to remember my father. And instead, I'm standing here having to prove my family exists on land we've worked for 3 generations. You really think I'd forge documents just to sit by a fire?" The older deputy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, let's all take a breath. Nobody's getting hauled off tonight. We'll get this straightened out." But as Margot's shouting grew louder, Devin realized something important. Truth might be on his side, but sometimes noise is just as powerful as facts. And when someone can't win with reason, they'll double down with volume. The 2 deputies stood there for a moment, one holding Devin's documents, the other watching Margot pace like she was running a campaign rally. The fire cracked quietly behind him, throwing shadows across the cabin's weathered porch. Devin kept his shoulders square and his breathing steady, though his pulse thudded like a drum in his ears. The older deputy, his badge reading Sergeant Lowell, adjusted his glasses and looked over the pages again. "Mr. Randle, these are clear. The deed's got county stamps, the tax receipts line up year after year. Everything checks out." But Margot wasn't letting go. She stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger toward Devin. "He's tricking you. You don't know him like I do. He just showed up here out of nowhere. That cabin is a violation, and I'm telling you, it's not allowed. I oversee this ridge." Devin couldn't stop himself from answering. "You keep saying you oversee the ridge, Margot, but you don't. Your HOA stops 2 miles down the road. This land has nothing to do with your community. My family's been here longer than the HOAs even existed." Margot whipped around to face the deputies. "See how he talks to me? Aggressive. Defiant. That's exactly why I called you. He's dangerous." The younger deputy, name tag Officer Kincaid, tilted his head. His voice was calm but probing. "Ma'am, he hasn't raised his voice. He's provided paperwork. What exactly has he done that makes you feel threatened?" Margot's mouth opened, then closed. She searched for words, finally blurting, "Look at him. Look at that truck. Does that look like someone who belongs in a private mountain community?" "He's lying. I know he is." Devin clenched his fists at his sides but kept his tone even. "My truck gets me where I need to go. It doesn't need your approval. And whether you like it or not, I belong here." The silence that followed was thick. Even the forest seemed to pause, waiting for someone to break it. Sergeant Lowell cleared his throat. "All right," he said firmly. "We're not here to play favorites. We're here to keep the peace, and from what I see, Mr. Randle has every right to be here. Ma'am, unless you can show us proof that contradicts this paperwork, there's not much more we can do." Margot's face twisted in outrage. "Proof? Proof? I am the proof. I've lived here 20 years. I know every face, every name, every lot number, and I've never seen him before. That cabin isn't even registered under Ridgeway Estates. It's illegal." Devin cut in before the deputies had to repeat themselves. "Of course it's not registered under Ridgeway Estates. It was built before Ridgeway was founded. You can't apply your rules retroactively to land you don't own." Officer Kincaid looked at her steadily. "Ma'am, that's correct. HOAs don't extend jurisdiction onto unrelated parcels. If this cabin is on its own lot and taxes are paid, then it's not under your authority." Her voice cracked louder this time. "So you're just going to let him squat here? You're siding with him?" Sergeant Lowell gave her a long, tired look. "No one's squatting. And we're not siding with anyone. We're siding with facts." Devin took a step back, folder still in his hand, but his body language steady. "Officers, I appreciate you coming out. I don't want trouble. I came here to enjoy the weekend and honor my dad. That's all. But I'm not going to be run off my own land because someone decides I don't look like I belong." For a flicker of a second, Kincaid's jaw tightened. He understood. Lowell adjusted his glasses again and sighed. Margot let out a harsh laugh, the kind that carries more desperation than humor. "Fine, fine. But when he causes problems, and he will, you'll remember I warned you. You'll regret not listening to me." She stomped back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard it rattled. But she didn't leave. She stayed there with the engine running, headlights trained on Devin as though daring him to breathe wrong. The deputies glanced at each other. "Mr. Randle," Lowell said, "if she calls again, we'll have to come back. Keep your documents handy, just in case. I don't see an issue here, but tempers like this can spiral." Devin nodded, though a tightness lingered in his chest. He had done nothing wrong, yet he knew the burden was still on him to prove it again and again if she kept pressing. But sometimes, the louder someone fights to hold power they don't actually have, the harder they're willing to push when that power slips through their fingers. The clearing felt like a stage, every eye trained on Devin and Margot, with the deputies caught in the middle. The glow from Margot's headlights cut sharp lines across the cabin, throwing long shadows that only made the moment feel heavier. Devin stayed rooted in place, folder in hand, determined not to be the one who broke. Margot stepped back out of her SUV, notebook tucked under her arm, her voice sharper than ever. "You're not listening," she barked at the deputies. "He's dangerous." "He's lying. You should be cuffing him, not standing around debating property records." Sergeant Lowell shifted his weight, hands steady on his belt. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the records. They're consistent with county files. This cabin belongs to Mr. Randle's family. Unless you have paperwork proving otherwise, there's no violation." She threw her arms wide. "So what? Anyone can just wave around a folder and suddenly they own a mountain? Is that how this works now?" Devin took a slow breath before answering. "This isn't just a folder. Those are legal documents. Stamped, verified. You can call the courthouse yourself if you don't believe me." Her glare cut through him. "You really think you can just talk your way into belonging here, don't you? That you can waltz up this ridge, claim a shack, and rewrite history?" Devin stepped closer, his voice steady, but edged with steel. "Rewrite history? Lady, history is the only reason I'm standing here. My father bled on this soil building that cabin. My grandfather hauled timber out of this forest long before you thought you owned the ridge. You're not defending history. You're trying to erase it." The younger deputy, Officer Kincaid, cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Ma'am, if we're being honest, this cabin predates Ridgeway Estates. It's documented. We can't treat it as part of your HOA's jurisdiction. That's just not how the law works." Margot rounded on him, her tone incredulous. "So you're siding with him too? You can't even see what's happening right in front of you. He doesn't belong here, and you're letting him take over." Her words struck a chord, and for the first time, Devin let his frustration spill out. "Why don't you just say what you really mean, Margot? You've been hinting at it since you drove up. You're not upset about paperwork. You're upset because someone like me owns land you think should belong to people like you." The The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Margot's face flushed deep red, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she spat out, "You said it, not me." A heavy silence fell. Even Sergeant Lowell, who had kept his composure the whole time, shifted uncomfortably. Kincaid looked between the two, lips pressed tight. Devin broke the silence, his voice quieter now but firm. "This cabin isn't just wood and nails. It's the story of my family, and no amount of shouting from an HOA president is going to erase that." Margot snapped her notebook open, flipping through pages, though it was clear she had nothing useful to show. Her words came out shaky but loud. "You can stand there with your fake stories and your fake documents, but this isn't over. If the sheriff's office won't do its job, Ridgeway will. We have standards, we have rules, and people like you can't just—" "Enough," Sergeant Lowell said firmly, raising a hand. His tone cut across her rant like a blade. "Ma'am, we're not going to arrest a man on his own property without evidence. That's not how this department operates. You've made your complaint, we've investigated, and the matter is settled tonight. If you keep harassing him, you'll be the one facing charges." Margot's jaw dropped, her outrage almost theatrical. "Charges? Me? I'm protecting my community." Kincaid's voice carried less patience now. "Protecting your community doesn't mean policing land that isn't yours. This isn't about Ridgeway. This is about one man on his own property. If you can't accept that, the problem isn't him. It's you." Devin let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For once, the deputies' voices carried louder than hers. But he knew this wasn't the end. People like Margot didn't just slink away. They regrouped, reloaded, and came back louder the next time. He glanced at the fire, the flames lower now, the smoke drifting lazily toward the tree line. He wanted to sit back down, crack open a beer, and pretend none of this had happened. But the weight of the standoff pressed too heavy on his shoulders. Because sometimes, when the truth is too plain to deny, people don't surrender. They look for the next angle. The confrontation seemed to settle, but Devin could tell Margot wasn't finished. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths, her hands twitching at her sides as if they couldn't decide whether to write something in her notebook or point at him again. The deputies were doing their best to stay calm, but the air had changed. What started as a dispute about property was now something uglier, something that cut deeper than deeds and tax records. Margot took a step closer, her heels grinding into the gravel. "You know what the real problem is?" she hissed. "People like you come up here thinking you can claim what you want. You buy your way in, and suddenly the whole place goes downhill. I've seen it before, and I won't let it happen again." The words weren't shouted this time. They were quieter, colder, and somehow more dangerous. Officer Kincaid shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Sergeant Lowell as though deciding if they should intervene. Devin held his ground. "I didn't buy my way in," Devin said, his voice low but steady. "My family worked for this land before you even knew these mountains existed. We didn't need a gated entrance or a committee to validate us. We just built. And we lived." Margot's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "That's what you think. But land doesn't stay with people like you forever. Eventually it changes hands. It gets cleaned up, civilized. And I'll see to it that this ridge stays that way." The jab wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about bloodlines, about who deserved to stand where they stood. Devin felt heat rise in his chest, but he remembered his father's words about patience. He chose them carefully now. "Civilized?" he repeated slowly. "You think painting a fence white and putting up a set of bylaws makes you the savior of this ridge? My father hammered every nail in that cabin with his own 2 hands. My grandfather hauled stone out of the riverbed to build that fire pit. If that's not civilized, I don't know what is." For a moment, even the deputies didn't speak. The fire hissed as a log broke apart, sparks snapping into the night air. Then Sergeant Lowell cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this conversation is going nowhere productive. Mr. Randle has shown us documents that prove ownership. We've warned you about harassment. Unless you want to risk charges yourself, I suggest you return to your property." Margot wheeled on him, her face flushed, her voice cracking with outrage. "So you're just going to take his side? After everything I've told you? You're ignoring me because I'm trying to protect Ridgway, while he's the intruder." Kincaid stepped forward now, his tone firm. "Ma'am, you've made serious claims without evidence. Meanwhile, Mr. Randle has provided clear proof. If you continue to escalate this, it won't end the way you want it to." For the first time since she arrived, Margot faltered. The fire in her eyes flickered, and her mouth opened without sound. It was a tiny crack in her armor, but Devin caught it. He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "You've built your whole sense of power on rules you wrote for people who chose to live under them. But they don't apply here. And no matter how many times you shout, you can't rewrite the truth. This cabin is mine. This land is mine. And deep down, you know it." Margot's fists clenched, her knuckles whitening. But she didn't step closer. She glanced at the deputies again, searching for an ally and finding none. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Then, almost like she couldn't help herself, Margot snapped. "This isn't over. You hear me? I don't care what papers you wave around. This isn't over." Her voice echoed against the trees before she stormed back toward her SUV. She yanked the door open, slamming it hard enough to rattle the frame, but she didn't start the engine. She just sat there, her headlights glaring like eyes fixed on Devin. Sergeant Lowell exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Mr. Randle, we're going to stay for a few more minutes. Make sure things don't get worse." Devin nodded, though his hands were still tense at his sides. He looked at the fire again, its glow softer now, and thought about how quickly peace could turn to confrontation when someone felt entitled to everything around them. Because sometimes, the turning point in a conflict isn't when proof is shown, it's when someone finally reveals what they've really been hiding. The deputies stayed, their cruisers parked at the edge of the clearing, red and blue lights casting faint pulses against the trees. For Devin, those few minutes felt longer than the whole drive up from Charlotte. Margot remained in her SUV, headlights blazing on him like interrogation lamps. She wasn't leaving, not yet. And as it turned out, neither were the people who had been drawn by the commotion. From down the gravel road, another set of lights appeared. Then another. Within half an hour, a handful of vehicles had pulled up at the edge of the property, neighbors curious about why sheriff's cruisers and Margot's SUV were all gathered in one spot. Car doors opened, and voices filled the cool mountain air. "Margot, what's going on out here?" a man called, stepping out of a red pickup. His name was Edgar Hensley, a tall man in his 50s with a baseball cap tugged low over his forehead. He was followed by his wife, Sharon, who folded her arms and stared at Devin like she was already forming an opinion. Margot leapt from her SUV, notebook clutched like a trophy. "Finally, someone else sees it. This man is trespassing. I caught him breaking into that shack and pretending it's his. I called the sheriff to have him removed." Devin stepped forward, holding his folder high enough for all to see. "That shack is my family's cabin. Built in the 1950s. Here's the deed. Here are the tax records, and here are photos of 3 generations living here. I'm not pretending, and I'm not trespassing." Edgar hesitated, glancing at the deputies, then at Margot. "Is that true?" Officer Kincaid nodded. "It checks out. We've looked at the documents. It's his land." But Sharon wasn't convinced. "If it's really his, why haven't we seen him before? We've lived up here almost 10 years. I've never seen his face." Devin's patience thinned, but he kept his voice measured. "Because I live in Charlotte. I come when I can. I work full-time, and sometimes life gets in the way. But this land has been in my family since long before Ridgway Estates existed. Just because you haven't seen me doesn't mean I don't belong here." Another neighbor, a younger woman named Colleen Ramirez, stepped closer, frowning. "Wait, Margot, didn't you say the HOA only manages Ridgway properties? His cabin isn't part of Ridgway. Why does it matter what he does here?" Margot's head snapped toward her, eyes flashing. "It matters because when outsiders start moving in, standards drop. First it's one cabin, then it's clutter, then it's who knows what. I'm not going to watch this ridge turn into something we all regret." Colleen crossed her arms. "That cabin's been here longer than your HOA. Maybe you should stop acting like you run the whole mountain." The crowd shifted uneasily. A couple of people murmured agreement. Sharon muttered something under her breath about keeping things safe, while Edgar looked torn. The split was obvious. Some neighbors sided with Margot, others saw through her overreach. Devin felt the weight of their eyes on him, and for the first time that evening, he spoke not just to Margot, but to everyone gathered. "You all want to talk about standards?" he said, his voice carrying steady across the clearing. "My grandfather built this cabin with his bare hands. He hauled lumber up here without machines, without help. My father raised me here every summer, taught me to respect the land, to work hard, and to honor what came before us. That's not lowering standards. That's building them." A murmur rippled through the group. Colleen nodded, while Edgar rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Even Sharon looked momentarily unsure. Margot, though, only grew more defiant. "Don't be fooled by his stories. He's manipulating you. I've kept this community clean, safe, and orderly for 20 years. Without people like me, Ridgeway would fall apart. And if we let him stay, it starts here." Sergeant Lowell finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority that silenced the chatter. "Enough. This isn't up for a community vote. This is private property, and Mr. Randle has proven ownership. Anyone interfering further is the one breaking the law." The crowd quieted, though not without some lingering side glances. Edgar muttered something about worth checking at the courthouse, while Sharon gave Margot a look that mixed doubt and loyalty. Colleen, meanwhile, stepped closer to Devin. "Don't let her scare you," she said quietly. "Some of us know she oversteps. You've got just as much right to be here as anyone." Devin gave a small nod, grateful for the support, but aware of how fragile it felt. One ally in a crowd didn't erase the hostility radiating from Margot or the suspicion lingering in others. He turned back toward the fire, tossing another log into the flames, the sparks swirling up into the night. He wanted to enjoy the peace his father once knew, but the gaze of a divided community weighed heavy on his back. The tension in the clearing sat like a storm cloud, swollen and waiting to break. Devin stood his ground at the edge of the firelight, while Margot fumed by her SUV, arms crossed, tapping her foot as if each second of silence was proof the deputies weren't doing their jobs. The crowd of neighbors hadn't dispersed either. Their curiosity kept them tethered there, whispers bouncing from one pair of lips to another. Finally, Sergeant Lowell stepped forward, clearing his throat in a way that demanded attention. "All right, everyone. This stops here. Mr. Randle has shown legal proof. We've verified it. This property is his. End of discussion." Margot exploded. "So that's it? You're going to just leave him here like nothing happened? You're going to let him plant himself here and tear apart everything we've built?" The older deputy's patience snapped. His voice rose, firm but sharp. "Ma'am, you've made accusations without evidence. You've harassed a property owner on his own land. If you continue this, the next report we file won't be against him, it'll be against you." The crowd stirred at that. A couple of neighbors shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the tide had turned. Sharon lowered her gaze. Edgar gave a low whistle and muttered, "Never thought I'd see the day." Margot sputtered, struggling to form words. She opened her notebook as though something inside might save her, but it was just pages of handwritten HOA notes, grass heights, paint colors, noise complaints. None of it meant anything here. Devin seized the moment. He stepped closer to the deputies, his voice even but strong. "Officers, I've shown you my documents. You've seen the evidence. I'm not leaving. This cabin is more than just mine. It's my family's legacy, and I'll defend that as long as I'm breathing." Kincaid nodded firmly. "You don't have to convince us, sir. We see it." He glanced at Margot. "And if anyone keeps interfering, we'll know exactly how to respond." The words cut through the night, final and unyielding. Margot, however, wasn't ready to swallow defeat. She pointed one trembling finger at Devin. "This isn't the end. You'll regret standing here like you own the place. I'll take this to the HOA board, the county, whoever I have to." You'll see Devin met her eyes steadily. "Take it wherever you want. Truth doesn't change just because you don't like it." The firelight flickered across both their faces, his calm, hers burning with fury. The deputies waited a beat, then Lowell motioned toward Margot's SUV. "Ma'am, go home. You've done enough for one night." Slowly, reluctantly, Margot stomped back to her vehicle. She slammed the door, revved the engine, and sped off down the gravel road, her headlights vanishing into the dark. The crowd lingered a little longer, then began to disperse too. Edgar tipped his cap at Devin, though his face gave nothing away. Sharon avoided his eyes entirely. Only Colleen paused to offer a quiet word before she left. "Don't let her stop you," she said softly. "You've got roots here, deeper than hers." Don't forget that Devin gave her a grateful nod, though exhaustion pressed heavy on him. The deputies wrapped up, advising him to call if Margot returned, then climbed into their cruisers and drove off. And just like that, silence returned to the ridge. Devin stood alone by the fire, the glow of the flames painting the cabin in warm light. His hands finally unclenched, though the ache in his chest remained. He glanced down at the folder of documents still clutched tightly under his arm. For something that should have been straightforward, an ordinary visit to his family's land, he had been forced to defend his very right to stand on soil his father once tilled. It left him tired, angry, but also resolute. Because sometimes winning isn't about shouting the loudest or convincing the crowd. It's about holding steady, knowing the truth is heavier than any lie someone can throw at you. When the last pair of headlights disappeared down the road, Devin was left with the quiet he had come here seeking in the first place. But it didn't feel the same. The fire still burned, snapping and hissing, but instead of comfort, the flames reminded him of the confrontation that had just played out. He sat in his camp chair, the weight of the folder still resting on his lap, staring at the cabin his father built with calloused hands more than half a century ago. For a while he let the silence sink in. He thought of his father, how the man always preached patience and dignity even when life tested him. "Never let anyone take from you what you know is yours," his dad used to say. Those words echoed now, louder than the shouting, louder than Margot's accusations. Devin looked around the clearing. To him, every inch of this place carried a memory. The porch, where he'd once sat as a boy, legs dangling as his father taught him how to whittle a stick. The fire pit, where his grandfather would roast trout they caught from the nearby stream. Even the dirt path leading down to the truck was etched with tire tracks layered over decades of visits. This wasn't just property. It was history, family, blood. And tonight, he had nearly been pushed off it by someone who believed her title, her influence and her prejudice were more powerful than truth. That thought gnawed at him, but it also hardened something inside. He realized the fight hadn't been just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, even when the evidence said otherwise. He leaned back, staring into the dark forest. "Dad," he whispered under his breath. I held my ground. The stars emerged overhead, sharp and clear against the mountain sky. For the first time all night, Devin let himself breathe deeply. He knew Margot would return. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually. People like her didn't surrender quietly. But now, Devin also knew he had allies, even if only a few neighbors were brave enough to speak up. And he had something stronger than all of them: proof, patience, and a legacy that couldn't be erased. As the fire burned lower, Devin closed the photo album he'd left open on the table. A picture of his father holding him as a toddler smiled back at him. He realized that one day someone else might sit in this same clearing, defending the cabin against a new challenge. That was the price of heritage. You didn't just inherit the land, you inherited the responsibility to protect it. The lesson weighed heavy, but clear. Some fights aren't about winning in the moment. They're about standing steady, showing dignity even when others strip theirs away. And in doing so, you don't just defend your own name, you defend the idea that truth still matters. Devin finally rose, carrying the documents back inside the cabin. He placed them on the mantel beside the carvings he and his father had etched decades ago. Proof of belonging, side by side with the proof of memory. The cabin creaked softly as he shut the door, as if settling back into its watch. By morning, the mountain would be quiet again, and Margot would likely be on the phone, stirring new drama. But Devin knew one thing. She hadn't beaten him tonight. She never could, because legacy is louder than lies. And if there's anything to take from Devin's story, it's this. Protect what's yours, not just with words, but with patience, dignity, and truth. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't belong where your roots run deep. And if you've followed this story all the way here, I want to leave you with one last thought. If standing your ground with respect and truth matters to you, subscribe to this channel, because stories like Devin's remind us that no matter how loud the world gets, the truth is still worth holding on to.